And now, the conclusion of Friday the 13th, Hate, Kill, Repeat. Chapter 22. Well, said Norwood Thawn, thanks for the blast from the past. And it was a nice read, but you sure took your time. Melissa Van Stadt was using a handkerchief to wipe as much of the mess from her face as possible. It came off in thick globs. I said I'd look out for you, she said. Just didn't expect it to happen within a year. I thought I might as well let Ed change the tire to save us the job. You know, I wasn't all sure that you would recognize me. That's also why I let you read my personal diary. See if you would remember me, and also so you'd get a better idea of who I am and what I stand for. Oh, there was no need for the diary. I never forget a pretty face. He considered those words, or a cliché. If the compliment was making Van Stadt blush, then it was hard to see through all the blood. All day, I must admit, I was praying that it wouldn't come to this, she said. I was hoping that we wouldn't find you. But of course, that goddamn alcoholic had to go and be the master profiler. Yes, didn't he? Thawns said, studying the pulp that had once been Edward Daimler's head. Well, who's laughing now? Anyway, if he was abusing the grape, then he deserved it on general principles. I just wish you hadn't shot him inside the vehicle. This is truly disgusting. Van Stadt nodded as she wiped her face harder, using the wing mirror as her guide. The Lincoln seemed like a tiny point of light in a galaxy of black. A thought struck her. So, were you telling the truth about Penelope? She asked. Thawn nodded, exhaling heavily. Jason killed her. I'm so sorry for your loss, and for the Redeemers. And as I said, I will kill him. Can I have my knife back from the trunk? Sure, she said, pressing a button that prompted the trunk to pop open. She had already undid his handcuffs, and he was free to go wherever he wanted. Norwood, she said, Penelope may have been cruelly taken from you, but you'll never be alone. The two of us should stick together, you know? Thawn looked at her strangely for a moment, then smiled. That's right. Van Stadt then said, Let me give you my number. Maybe we should meet up when it's safe. Thank you. I'd like that. He clambered out of the Lincoln and dragged Daimler's headless corpse out of the passenger seat. Then he walked to the trunk and undid the plastic forensics bag, which held his precious weapon. The vehicle hummed and vibrated as the engine coughed into life. As Thawn weighed the knife in one hand, he stared coldly over the roof and beyond, off along the road. The Phoenix Heights' one remaining security guard was running toward Clayton Hines in the foyer, along with several guests who had no intention of stopping until they were safely off the premises. Some had suffered bloody wounds. Others carried serious burns, their clothes smoldering. Most of them had ignored the fire alarm until it was almost too late. Hines was panic-stricken. 5 minutes ago, he had seen his head chef running through the foyer at full pelt, his white uniform splattered with blood. Hines had called out, demanding to know what was going on, but Wayland vanished through the front doors out into the night. Meyer! Barked Hines, seizing his unfeasibly tall guard by the shoulders, panicking even more when he saw the haunted fear in the man's eyes. Tell me whatever's happening is under control. It's Myers, sir, and... Who gives a fuck what your name is? Hines said, screaming to make himself heard above the surrounding pandemonium, sending spittle flying into Myers' face. The security guard struggled to deliver the necessary information to Hines. We need to evacuate the building immediately. Not only do we have a real fire, but an intruder killing people. He's taken out most of our team, including Walt, and I can't reach Fenton or Brooks on the radio. I'm afraid I ran from the kitchen, sir. This killer seems to be wearing heavy-duty bulletproof equipment. We could barely touch him. Hines looked as though he was about to die right there on the spot. His face was bright red and his eyes danced madly. More mayhem rang out around them. What the fuck are you saying? Hines demanded. Who is the killer? Take him down! Myers opened his mouth to answer and choked. Hines stared at him indignantly. Speak, you idiot! He cried. Blood dribbled, then poured out of Myers' slack mouth. Hines watched horrified as a cruel metal spike burst out of the security guard's stomach. Myers slowly fell to the floor, revealing Jason standing behind him. Jutting from Myers' back was a golden pole with the restaurant menu attached to the other end. All around the foyer, terrified guests bolted toward the outside world. Hines tried to do just that, but collided with a party of his own guests. He shoved a young girl aside, sending her spinning against a wall. The girl's father growled and raised a fist to punch Hines. Jason tugged the pole out of Myers and hurled it like a javelin into the back of Hines's head. The hotel manager spun around theatrically, eyes lividly bloodshot. The spikes tipped where his nose once was, making him resemble some surreal caricature. He slumped face down to the floor, the restaurant menu jutting out of his head. The shocked father grabbed his daughter's hand, ushering the whole family out through the glass doors. A new wave of people poured out into the foyer, some from the elevators. Jason raised his meat cleaver in greeting. Many turned and ran back toward the flames. "Come on, Missy, you've got to wake up. Get the hell off of Halo, stop slapping her. Don't tell me what to do, boy. Ryger, just shake her, that's an order. We don't slap civilians, remember?" "Yes, sir." Halo's eyes snapped open to see a huddle of faces above her. "I'm awake," she protested. "There's something going on downstairs," said Tom, stroking her face where Ryger had struck. "We need to leave the building, Halo." Halo sat bolt upright on the bed. "But what about Shelley? We can't leave her here." "Miss Harlan," said Claymart kindly, "I'm afraid your sister is dead." "Yeah, sure, I know that," said Halo impatiently. "But we can't leave her. She'll be lonely." Claymart and Ryger exchanged worried looks. Tom placed a hand on Halo's shoulder, which she shrugged off. "Come on, Halo, we need to leave. There's definitely something going on downstairs. Listen, the fire alarm is still going and you can hear people screaming. This ain't no drill, honey." Halo jumped off the bed and rounded on the three men with wild, cloudy eyes. "Let me tell you, boys," she said, "there'll be some goddamn screaming in here if you expect me to leave my big sister." Hack, chop, slice. Jason made light work of the constant flow of guests attempting to leave. Most were too preoccupied with their lungs being full of smoke to notice him, until it was too late. Bodies littered the foyer, almost all missing one or more of their limbs. What remained of the reception staff lay on and behind the front desk. A middle-aged man charged into the foyer as a human fireball. His limbs flailed as he blindly ran toward Jason. Sensing movement, the giant turned and the man ran directly into the cleaver's blade. With a barely audible cry, he fell back off the blade, then collapsed on the ground, still burning but motionless. Whether Jason realized it or not, this was his first ever mercy killing. An old woman leaning against a Zimmer frame appeared at one end of the foyer. Upon seeing Jason, she made alarmed wheezing noises and tried to increase her speed. The giant stomped toward her, raising the cleaver. Ping! Jason turned to the direction of the noise, in time to see one of the elevator doors open, leaving the old woman to speed hobble toward freedom. He strode instead toward the middle-aged couple who had emerged from the elevator carriage, dragging bulky suitcases behind them. "Jesus!" cried the wife. "Who the hell is that?" A matchstick dropped from one corner of her husband's mouth. "He ain't no friggin' fireman, honey. Back in the elevator." The pair abandoned their cases and backed into the golden carriage, stabbing frantically at the buttons. Then they begged for their lives as Jason advanced on the closing elevator doors. Norwood extended his hand. "Give me the gun." Driving beside him, Melissa Van Stadt passed over the weapon. Thawne held it in his right hand for a while, rubbing his forefinger over the trigger. Then he handed it back. "That handles the fingerprint side of things. I snatched the gun from you, blew poor Ed's head off, held me at gunpoint and made me drive you to the hotel, then tied me up. You want me to tie you up? Well, otherwise you'd have to kill me." "That's true. I am a murdering fiend after all." Van Stadt smiled affectionately. "You've just been doing the right thing and you know it. I'd do anything to support this cause." She placed her hand on his for a moment, then pulled it away. In fact, I already have. You're not the only Redeemer I've helped out of trouble. Oh, really? Oh, yes. This job allows a great deal of travel. Well, I'm sure. Are you entirely sure you want to go to the hotel? Norwood wrapped his hand around the full circumference of his knife's base. Oh, yes. I thirst for vengeance. Van Stat glanced at the weapon as though seeing it for the first time. Are those Penelope's bones? Norwood nodded gravely. Appropriate, don't you think? She'll be killing Jason herself, in effect. He pulled a metallic silver case from a pocket. Van Stat didn't look convinced. If this Jason is as strong and unstoppable as you say he is, shouldn't you be getting out of town? I'd hate to save your liberty, only to see you lose everything. I have no choice, Norwood said quietly. She's in my head, telling me to do it. I must do it. If I can, I'll silence that little whore Halo, too. Opening the silver case, he pulled out a cigarette and placed it between his lips. A search for his Zippo came up with nothing. Got a light, my dear? He said. I don't smoke, said Van Stat, frowning at the very idea. She drove on. Ping! An overweight Mexican businessman sighed with relief as the elevator finally reached his floor, the 12th. He'd begun to worry about 5 minutes of the fire alarm going, then investigated and seen smoke billowing out of windows below. He wanted out as quickly as possible. Fuck taking the stairs. The effort would probably kill him anyhow. As the elevator doors glided open, his reflection was replaced by a nightmarish vision. The carriage was mostly filled by Jason Voorhees, who stood amidst what looked like an afternoon's work at the slaughterhouse. The entire floor of the elevator was awash with blood, in which the chunks of 2 dismembered corpses drifted. Before the businessman could run, Jason was upon him, swinging steel down into the man's heart. Blood sprayed Jason's mask as he wrenched the cleaver up through his victim's shoulder with a resounding crack. He was dead before he hit the floor. Smoke issued from beneath the elevator. The light inside the carriage flickered uncertainly. Ignoring all of these signals, Jason lumbered off along a long corridor lined with doors, some of which hung open. He rotated left and crashed through a locked door, sending it hurtling down to the ground, slashing the throat of a screaming young blonde wrapped in a towel. He immediately departed the room and walked on. Smashing through another door, he found a couple asleep in bed. Before they knew what was happening, he had decapitated one and chopped the other to pieces. Then he moved on, looking for more life to crush. One life in particular. Tom was beginning to despair. Halo had lost her mind. He cast his thoughts back to his college psychology class. What did they call this? Denial? Yes, this was textbook denial. Halo was talking like his Alzheimer's riddled grandmother, an empty smile plastered across her face. Her brain had erected a stone wall against reality. Claymark was using the phone, directing a helicopter to change course and head this way. Tom hoped he was merely allowing for the worst-case scenario. Ryger peered down out of the window. His rugged features registered alarm. There's smoke down there. We gotta go. Tom grabbed Halo's shoulders. Hear that? We could all die if we don't leave now. Halo stared at him dumbly, grinning. Sure. Cupping a hand over her mouth, she directed her voice toward the bathroom. Come on, Shelley. Time to skedaddle. The fire had devastated most of the ground floor. The intense heat had ignited the wiring, which serviced most of the building, causing it to melt, burn, and spread. Many guests had been burnt alive in their rooms, or suffocated by the black smoke that was sweeping along the corridors. The fire alarm had stopped, the system having been compromised by the very blaze it had been designed to detect. Residents piled down the external fire escape in their undergarments, few of them pausing to help the less actively mobile. As too many people attempted the descent at once, several toppled over the edge, plunging to their deaths. Fire engine sirens wailed in the distance, but the local department's efforts would be an operation and damage limitation at best. The hotel was dying. If there was one thing Rosa Mendez hated about living in this place, it was the noise you heard late at night. Sometimes it was difficult to sleep, and she was 50. She needed that fucking rest. Her room was the hotel's smallest. She knew that. After all, she was a cleaner, and she got to clean most of the other rooms on a daily basis. She had a bedroom and a tiny bathroom. The limited space was made bearable only by the fact that her bed swung neatly back up into the wall when not in use. She was lying on it and getting annoyed. The damn fire alarm had been bad enough. Thank God it had finally stopped. But she could hear guests shouting. She was used to a little chatter out in the corridor, or through the surprisingly thin walls between rooms, but people were running riot out there. Was a party going on in one of the rooms? As more wild noise cut through the night, Mendez switched on a side lamp, heaved herself out of bed, and wrapped a nightgown around herself. Heading over to the door, she peered through the spy hole embedded in the wood. Through the lens, she saw the usual distorted image of an empty corridor. Perhaps the door opposite was ajar, but it was difficult to tell. A distant, rowdy yell made her curse. She grabbed the door handle and wrenched it open, her bare feet padding out into the carpet. The opposite door was yanked open from within, and Jason stomped out, seizing a horrified Mendez by the shoulders. Her mouth effected a silent scream as he dragged her back into her room and threw her across the bed. Quickly surveying the possibilities, Jason grabbed the foot of the bed. He wrenched it upwards and back against the wall. Only the cleaner's head, arms, and feet were visible at either side of the bed. Placing a gourd-caked boot against the bed's upright base, Jason grabbed one of her hands, one of her feet, and pulled them toward him. Mendez howled as a sickening crunch signaled the ruin of her spine. Jason released her and marched out of the room. A thick cloud of smoke drifted behind him like a silent companion. Shortly, another splintering of wood and rending of metal was followed by more screams. He marched on to snuff out every life he would find, until he would find the one he truly wanted dead. Hate, kill, repeat was all he knew. "Here you are, Mr. Thawn. That'll be $10. Van Stad had pulled the Lincoln up halfway along the driveway that served the Phoenix Heights. "I thought it would be safer for you to get out at a safe distance here, rather than driving right up to the front doors." "Good point, Melissa." Norwood Thawn turned and studied her face. Her deep blue eyes, the expression that spoke of admiration, maybe even worship. "Here's to unity," she said. "To unity," nodded Thawn. "Okay, tie me up," she said. "Perhaps you could punch me too, or something. Whatever looks more convincing." A pause. "Convincing. Well, I think I've got an idea," Norwood said casually. His bone knife flashed across the car's confined space. Its jagged prongs plunged easily through Van Stad's shirt and into her chest. She gasped and spluttered, eyes wide. "Convincing enough, do you think?" said Norwood, his face hardening. "Here's your last thought on earth. My wife is irreplaceable. No one will ever replace her. No one will ever replace her." He emphasized the last "no one" by driving the weapon deeper into the FBI agent's body. As Melissa Van Stad's breathing faded, she was a picture of disillusionment. Norwood watched until the light in her eyes seemed to dwindle, then yanked the knife back out, splashing more blood against the windshield. He grabbed the gun from Van Stad's holster. Then he climbed out of the car and darted along the driveway, keeping as close to the trees as possible. The familiar side of the hotel soon came into view. Norwood peered up at it. Was that smoke coming out of the windows? Some of the rooms also had a glow which very much resembled fire. A shadowy figure was running toward him, past the fountain, over the gravel, closing fast. He gripped the knife in one hand and the gun in the other. The figure, a man of roughly his own age, kept running. Thawne realized he was simply escaping the grounds. Thawne chuckled to himself and once again let his eyes wander up the hotel's distressed front face. Jason was definitely here, but not for long. "That's it. We're going right now." Tom grabbed Halo's hand and yanked her across the suite's carpet. To his surprise, she offered no resistance. "Bye, Shelley," she yelled over her shoulder. "See you in the bar later." Claymark and Riger anxiously waited by the door. "There's no smoke up here yet," said the sheriff, "but it's only a matter of time. Depends how strong this place's firewalls are. We need to take the fire escape down." The four of them ducked out into the empty corridor, Claymark leading the way. "Why not the elevator?" asked Tom. "You don't use 'em in a fire," said Ryger as though he was an idiot. Tom bristled. He didn't like this fat fuck. He kept a tight grip on Halo as they all broke into an urgent jog, following the corridor as it twisted from side to side. "Is that the fire escape?" Tom heard Ryger ask his sheriff, pointing to something at the corridor's far end. "Looks that way. Let's get to it, Ken." Seeing the fire escape spurred everybody on except for Halo, who ran leisurely, like a tired child being led. Tom yelped. Halo was squeezing his hand so hard that he feared the bones would shatter. She stopped dead, forcing him to do the same. Tom watched the cops run ahead, oblivious that he and Halo were no longer behind them. "What is it?" he said, desperate to get out of this goddamn building. Halo appeared to be in the grip of an asthma attack. "He's here," she said. "I can feel him." Tom stared at her. "Jason?" A huge crash like a thunderclap seized both their attentions. They turned to see Jason Voorhees smashing up through the floorboards in a haze of cracked wood and smoke. Landing on his feet in front of the hole, he stood between the cops and the fire escape. Chapter 23. Halo felt as though she was waking up from a nightmare, except it wasn't over yet. As Tom looked on, she snapped back into survival mode. Everything came back to her, even Shelley's death, but the need to live outweighed all other concerns. "Let's go back," she said to Tom, who was struggling to process his first sight of Jason Voorhees. "Back?" he protested. "But the only way out is the fire escape, and we can't—" He was interrupted by a blast from Ryger's shotgun, which plowed into Jason's stomach, throwing him off balance. Even from this distance, Halo and Tom physically felt the thud as he hit the floor. Halo heard Ryger say, "That ought to do it," but she knew damn well that it wouldn't. Nevertheless, Jason presently lay flat on the carpet. For a moment, she entertained the idea of dashing past him to get to that fire escape. Then he sat up, making the cops yell in surprise, and swung his cleaver blade clean through both of Ryger's legs, just above the knee. The deputy's upper half fell backwards, his divorced legs toppling like skittles. He fired the shotgun again, whether by accident or design, and the second salvo pumped into the ceiling. Plaster rained down on Jason and the two men, one of whom was lying on his back, screaming for mercy as Jason stood over him. Claymark was yelling something, locked into the gun-leveling stance, but it did no good. Jason trod over what remained of Ryger's body, popping his stomach, left shoulder and head like water balloons. "Come on, Sheriff!" Halo cried. "You can't stop him!" With a cry of anguish, Claymark took her advice and came running back along the corridor. It was his turn to manifest shock symptoms, as the three of them charged away from Jason. "Why doesn't the man die?" he repeatedly babbled, shaking his head. 2 corridor bends later, Jason was no longer in view behind them. "Maybe we should try the elevator now," said Tom. "It might still work." "I doubt it," gasped Halo, "but let's see." The golden doors came quickly into view. Tom pressed the call button 3 times in sharp succession. To their surprise, the doors slid open, revealing an empty, blackened shaft. "Oh, great," said Claymark, peering down. "I can't even see the goddamn elevator." "You two go ahead," said Halo, nodding along the corridor. She looked back anxiously over her shoulders. "I want to try something." "What?" said Tom. "What do you want to try? Let's just keep running." "Go ahead," she repeated, her voice firmer and louder. This time Tom and Claymark submitted and moved off along the corridor. Halo stood in front of the elevator, facing back the way they had come. As inexorable as the changing of the seasons, Jason turned the corner. Upon seeing her, his pace quickened, and he hoisted the cleaver. She suddenly paused to wonder exactly what it was that she wanted to try. Was she going to jump aside at the last possible second and let him fall down the shaft, or drag him down there with her? She had little time to decide because Jason was closing in, his head cocked to one side as though he was puzzled by Halo presenting herself to him this way. She hoped he was too pig ignorant to be suspicious of such an easy kill. after a memorably long chase. She desperately wanted him to break into a run. That would help. Then his momentum might carry him over the edge, down into the black. But Jason Voorhees did not run. Then he was upon her, swinging that chopper down in a wide arc, which threatened to bisect her. Somewhere along the corridor to her left, she heard Tom yelling. He was watching. She ducked aside, feeling the sharp blade cleave hairs from her head. The force behind Jason's swipe had unbalanced him. All his weight was leaning forwards. Reaching up with both hands, Halo grabbed the chain around his neck and swung him with all her might. He didn't move. Regaining his balance, Jason looked down at Halo and prepared to deliver the coup de grace. Then, for no reason immediately apparent to her, he tumbled forward and disappeared into the shaft. Halo sat up stunned to see Tom and the sheriff standing there. "Teamwork," said Tom, sharing a high five with Claymark. "We shoved him in there good." "Thanks," said Halo, her eyes lingering on Tom's for a second. "I was almost hamburger there." With something approaching a smile, she picked herself up and peered down into the shaft's gloom, as steeply as she dared. That was all she could see. Gloom. Tom and the sheriff joined her. Claymark's face was still flushed. He still appeared traumatized by this indestructible being. "But will that kill him?" "I don't have a clue," said Halo from over Tom's shoulder. "But it should get him away from us for a while. Now we just need to—" The words evaporated in her mouth as the rasp of metal on metal sounded. A series of heavy thumps and jolts followed. Jason Voorhees began to clamber back out of the elevator shaft with a series of hoarse grunts. They backed away from him. Halo slapped her hand on the back of Claymark's wrist as he went to tug his gun from its hip holster. "Don't waste your bullets," she warned. "God, the fucker must have been hanging on. Let's run!" Already, Jason was blocking the route back to the fire escape. So once again, they were forced to move in the opposite direction. As the trio darted around a sharp bend, Halo spied an open room door and impulsively hurtled through, followed by Tom and Claymark. Once they were inside, she closed the door and locked it. "What are we doing?" protested Claymark as he looked around a spacious suite, which, judging by the possessions scattered around, had been abandoned. "Why shouldn't we lock ourselves away?" Halo fiercely shushed him. "If Jason walks past," she whispered, "we can leave and head back to the fire escape. Otherwise, he'll chase us forever. He doesn't stop. This is our only chance." Crash! The sound of a door being broken inward back out in a nearby corridor. Claymark opened his mouth to speak, but Halo shushed him again, listening keenly. Angered, the sheriff made his way over to the door with exaggerated tiptoe steps and carefully moved his eye over the spy hole. Halo and Tom watched him nervously, barely aware that they were still holding hands. Claymark shook his head, signaling that he could see nothing. Halo could feel heat gathering in the floor beneath them. Tom was feeling it too, judging by the way he was squeezing her hand. One of the room's walls caved in, sending splatter and lumps of brick hurtling through the air. Jason forced his way through the new hole, incandescent with rage. Claymark hurriedly opened the room's door and stepped through it. Jason walked across the carpet toward a frozen Halo and Tom. Standing in the open doorway, Claymark fired twice into Jason's shoulder. The giant glanced at Claymark, but was in no mood to be distracted. Claymark fired again, this time hitting Jason's left ear. The killer roared at this, clutching the side of his head. Straightening again, Jason finally changed plans and headed for Claymark. Halo dragged Tom across the room and through the hole in the wall. As they charged straight through the adjacent room, jumping over a freshly slain guest, they heard a pained yell from outside. Back out in the corridor, they saw Claymark crumpled and broken on the ground, begging for his life as Jason towered over him. "No!" cried Halo, her voice commanding rather than pleading, as Jason raised the cleaver again. There was no mercy. The blade chopped down through Claymark's skull, ending his torment permanently. Halo and Tom sprinted off along the corridor, conscious that they were finally positioned between Jason and the fire escape. The corridor was noticeably smokier, and it was becoming harder to breathe. Ryger's mutilated body signaled that the fire escape was imminent. It was signal that they were about to see the hole through which Jason had entered from the floor below. Holding hands, they leapt with perfect timing, sailing over the gap. Halo glanced downward, seeing a horrendous well of fire, smoke, and mangled metal. As they landed together on the other side, the fire escape door seemed to rush up to meet them. Tom shouldered it open, and they felt the heady rush of the fresh night air, contrasting drastically with the smog they had left behind. With sharp intakes of breath, the pair saw the roughly 9 levels of fire escape directly below them were missing. Down most of the gap's length, the brickwork showed damage where the fire escape structure had been ripped loose. The entire 7th floor gaped open like a mouth, as though it had been blown outwards. Way down on the ground, they could see a large, twisted pile of blackened metal and wrecked people. Halo and Tom had nowhere left to run. He knew it was insanity. Running up the stairs of a burning building went against the kind of rational thought for which he prided himself. Yet Penelope's voice was loud and clear in his head, spurring him on. The great Redeemer, his eternal wife, telling him what to do. "Climb on, my darling. Do not falter." Norwood had one shirt cuff pressed over his nose and mouth as he ran up the stairs through the lung-sucking fog. His legs felt weak, but he knew he could not allow them to fail him. He must go on. 2 levels down, the knife had fallen from his grasp and skidded along the floor. Crawling on hands and knees, coughing, he had regained the weapon and vowed never to release it again. Arriving at yet another level, he saw a huge number 7 on the wall. He grabbed the next banister and worked his way up it. Jason turned a corner and resumed his relentless stride toward Halo and Tom. They were back in that terrible corridor. Between them and Jason lay many doors, but Halo didn't like the idea of hiding in another room. It hadn't gotten them very far, and besides, the bastard would now see where they went, smoke or not. "Oh, God," said Halo, watching Jason march. "Let's go back outside and jump." "Hey," said Tom, pointing at a door marked stairs. "This goes up to the roof. The manager showed me. Go!" Halo wasted no time in grabbing the handle. Running through, she heard the door slam shut behind her. Immediately missing Tom's presence, she spun around and saw him on the other side of the door's reinforced glass pane. Smiling, he blew her a kiss. His voice sounded muffled. "Someone's got to hold him back, Halo." "Come on," she cried, now pleading more than commanding. "Come with me, please." Tom shook his head grimly. Halo heard something on the stairs below. Was it movement? Feet on stone? Peering downward, she saw only dark, swirling smoke. When she looked back at the glass square, Tom was gone. Norwood felt as though there was no oxygen left in his brain. He could barely think straight. The smoke had become thinner as he climbed. But the cumulative effect was devastating. He leaned against a wall beside the number 10. "Climb on, my darling. Seek vengeance." "I can't," said Norwood. He slumped to the ground, finally submitting to the lack of oxygen. He felt himself drifting away. Tom had wrapped himself around a bulky soft drinks machine. With Jason no more than a few big strides away, he pulled it off balance and rode it until it struck the opposite wall, blocking Jason's path. "That should slow you down," he said, covering his mouth and shifting from foot to foot. "God, the heat!" Jason reached the machine and stopped. He and Tom silently regarded each other. "Would you like a Coke?" said Tom. The machine vibrated as Jason seized it with both hands. Tom trembled. My bad. Diet Coke?" Jason tipped the machine sideways. It fell on Tom, crushing the lower half of his body against the ground and pinning him down. The weight was immense. Tom raised his one free hand as Jason walked around the machine. "Please," he said, "don't hurt her. Just don't hurt her." Jason's cleaver powered down. Tom wailed as 3 of his fingers struck a nearby wall. Jason raised the weapon again as smoke swirled around him. "Jason!" The voice was Halo's. "Come on, I'm still here, mother lover." "What are you doing?" called Tom, fighting the red-hot agony in his mutilated hand with every syllable. "Get out of here!" Jason lumbered off, swallowed up by the smog. "No!" roared Tom. "Come back, you fucking..." his mouth filled with smoke. As she clambered up the stairs to the roof, trying and failing to forget about Tom, it struck Halo that the area might be locked off. After all, unless you had a swimming pool or a restaurant up there, hotel proprietors weren't so keen on guests walking around on their roof, getting drunk and falling to their doom. The route upwards was surprisingly complex, a maze of corridors, stairs, and assorted maintenance equipment. She eventually reached a set of bulky double doors which didn't even have handles, just one long bar. She tugged it and pulled it and pushed it until it gave way and the doors opened outwards. Halo emerged from a corrugated iron hut positioned in the center of the roof's surface, which was vividly illuminated by spotlights and dotted with ventilation pipes and generators, hardly anywhere to hide. All around sprawled the vista of Crystal Lake, shrouded in places by smoke that drifted up from the hotel's pressure-cooking carcass. Already, even up here, Halo could feel the heat of the tarmac as she walked out onto it. Behind her, the doors crashed open. She saw Norwood Thawn falling down to his hands and knees on the ground by the metal hut. His body heaved as he fought for air. Halo raised the shotgun. Chapter 24. Chuck Whalen stood amid the chaos that had broken out in the hotel's front grounds. He was watching the place burn. Fire flashed out of almost every window right up to the 12th floor. Every few minutes there was a very audible crash from within the building, presumably as a section of floor collapsed. He had seen most of the fire escape come loose under the weight of so many trying to climb down it. He had heard those people's dying cries as the structure plummeted to the unforgiving earth. God damn them, if they'd only calmed the hell down and waited. What remained of the hotel staff had made a half-hearted attempt to round up guests and count heads, trying to do it by the book. Yet everyone knew that all that sensible official stuff didn't count for shit once there was a real-life emergency. It was like the safety instructions on an airplane. Once the ocean was rising up to meet the aircraft, it was every man for himself and screw the rest. His first instinct after speeding through the foyer had been to run until he was out of the country. Then curiosity got the better of him. If the Phoenix was going down, he wanted to see it, and he wanted to be told that the Fruit Loop in his kitchen was dead. Otherwise, he'd have to sleep with one eye open for the rest of his days. 2 fire engines and 6 ambulances cast flashing lights around the scene. Distant sirens confirmed that more were coming. Corpses littered the gravel, often tripping medics and firemen as they tried to do their jobs. The living showed few signs of gratitude for having survived. Groans of pain echoed all around him. People with bloody gashes or missing limbs bawled like babies as they were eased into ambulances. Whalen knew he should be helping, lifting one end of a stretcher or something, but like so many of the guests, he felt content to stand there, with the silver sheet wrapped around him, pretending to be in shock. Matter of fact, he didn't need to pretend. The cocaine made a reliable self-diagnosis difficult, but he knew that, when this was done, he'd need a damn good therapist. "I'm Zell Rayner from WCX News," said someone to his right, shoving a branded microphone under his nose. "Sir, what has been your experience here tonight?" Whalen eyed Rayner darkly. Then he placed a bloody palm on the newsman's face and casually shoved him away. "Where is he?" said Thawns, standing, his face tight with the effort, his clothes blackened. He coughed into one hand. Halo saw that the other gripped a bizarre knife. "Where's Jason?" Halo grimaced. "Shut up, you fucking bastard! You killed my sister!" Thawns seemed indifferent to the news. "Oh, did I? Which one was she?" "She's the one you're gonna die for." Halo tightened her finger on the trigger. "Have you turned the safety button off? It won't fire if you don't press it." Halo gritted her teeth. "Oh, and hold it against your shoulder. Otherwise the recoil might knock you off the building. We can't have that now, can we?" "I doubt the owner had time to put the safety back on," said Halo. "Why did you kill my sister?" "The receptionist." Thawne took 2 steps away from the metal hut, toward her. Halo held her ground. "Look," he said, "I'd love to discuss this with you in depth, but answer me this. Where's Jason?" Halo nodded behind him. coming up the stairs right now. Thawn rotated the full circle, shrewdly scanning the rooftop. For a moment there, he said, I thought that was one of those "he's behind you" ruses. He started walking around one side of the metal hut, his back now to her. Halo followed him, keeping the gun trained on him. "Stop right there," she shouted. "Where the hell are you going?" "To climb up on this thing," said Thawn, still presenting his back to her. "I want to get the element of surprise on that fucking monster." Halo found herself laughing. "Monster? You are so deluded. You're just the same as him, pure evil, full of hate." Thawn ignored her. He was reaching up the metal hut side, searching for hands and footholds. "Don't you suppose you'd like to give me a leg up?" he said, wrinkling his nose. "Fuck you," said Halo, with such force that spittle lashed her chin. "Aw, come on now," he protested. "Whatever little score you think you have to settle with me, we both want Jason dead, don't we? So let's work together. You hit him with that thing when he comes through the door, then I'll finish the job." "I'd rather die than work with you," she said. "Then kill yourself," he grumbled. "Right now I don't have time for this. I need retribution with or without you." He found a foothold and heaved himself up the rough surface with a clang. "And what about my justice, my revenge?" Thawne stared down at Halo from the hut. "We can deal with that afterwards, if we really must. It doesn't matter to me. I'm looking forward to being reunited with my wife." He glanced at the sky. Halo uttered a harsh, mocking laugh. "I don't know where you think you're going, mister, but it sure ain't heaven." Thawne fixed her with an exasperated stare. "Just get ready." Halo's head was spinning. As much as she hated to admit it, she and this fucker did share the same goal. Survive and kill Jason, the man-child who had disposed of almost everyone she knew, including Tom. She bit her lip and ran back in front of the entrance, positioning herself. Smoke gushed from underneath the doors. She wondered whether the fumes might finally have overcome Jason. Surely that wasn't possible, after everything she had seen him survive. Thawne had positioned himself at the peak of the hut's roof, hunched up like a gargoyle, clutching that knife. There was no part of her body that didn't want to raise Ryger's shotgun and blast him off that perch. Yet, if he was going to help bring Jason down, his death could wait a few minutes. Halo was also tempted to dash to the roof's edge and see what was happening down below. She resisted, keeping her eyes fixed on those doors, trying to forget that she could feel the ground's heat through the soles of her sneakers. An almighty rumble split the air behind her. Seeing that Thawne looked alarmed, she spun around and saw that a portion of the rooftop was no longer there, having collapsed. A jagged hole 10 feet square gaped up at the stars. Fire and smoke belched through its new outlet. "Jesus," she breathed, horribly transfixed by the sight. How long until the whole fucking building went down? "Hey!" The voice was Thawne's, strained and urgent. She spun around in time to see him falling through the air toward Jason, who was standing in front of the metal hut, the doors slamming shut behind him. Jason was entirely black, including most of his mask. Having heard Thawne's warning, Jason started to turn around. Thawne landed on the giant's back with a thud, hugging Jason's neck, his feet gripping the killer's waist. Jason swung violently, attempting to dislodge the aggressor. Some kind of gun struck the ground beside the two men. It must have tumbled from Thawne's pocket, Halo vaguely noted. She cursed herself for missing a chance to sink a slug into Jason. Leveling the shotgun at his chest, she rested the butt against her shoulder. That would be the only advice she would ever accept from Norwood. Thawne was wasting no time. As Jason thrashed wildly around, he leaned back like a bronco rider, his right hand in the air clutching the bone knife. Then with a snarl, he slammed it down. The sharp points disappeared into the top of Jason's skull. With a strangled grunt, Jason fell to his knees. Turning the cleaver around in his hand, he slammed it up and back over his own head. Thawne gasped hoarsely as it sank into his stomach. As Halo looked on, Thawne thumped his fist down on top of the bone knife. In reply, Jason twisted his upper body so dramatically that Thawne was sent hurtling off the cleaver. He landed awkwardly, something breaking inside him. Halo saw another portion of the roof caving downwards. There was no time to study it properly. She was about to blow Jason's head off. He was still on his knees, grabbing at his skull with both hands, trying to pull the blade out. Looking down the barrel, she fixed the mask in her sights. Then she squeezed the trigger. Despite Thawns' advice about recoil, the force of it still took her by surprise. She tried to regain her balance, but ended up on her back. Jason was still kneeling, no damage. "Fire again!" called Thawne, clutching at his stomach wound, shaking his head as though shrugging off a bad hangover. Jason rose yet again, the bone knife still protruding several inches from the top of his head. Crouching, Halo struggled to reload the shotgun. The fact that she had no idea how to do so was a problem. How did they do it on TV? She reached below the barrel and found a tubular handle with finger grip texture. Wrenching it back toward her, she mouthed a silent, "Yes," as the spent shell exited, courtesy of a slot on the weapon's side. She presumed that another shell had simultaneously clicked into position. Would it be the last? Jason walked toward Thawne, who was struggling like an overturned beetle. He flicked his wrist and a small blade appeared in his hand. He attempted to hurl it at Jason, but his arm had been broken. The blade fell uselessly to the ground. "Shoot!" Thawne screeched. "Fucking shoot!" Halo aimed the shotgun at Jason. She paused, frowning, as Jason threw his cleaver to one side. It clattered on the ground and lay still. Jason reached down toward Thawne with his bare hands. "No!" Halo fired. Jason's head exploded. At least, Halo thought it had. When she recovered and looked clearly, she had merely blown the protruding part of the bone knife to smithereens. Thawne was crying deliriously as Jason seized hold of his upper body, tugging in opposite directions. He was going to tear the man apart. "Help me!" he cried, reaching out for Halo. "Shoot again!" Halo's heart pounded. She couldn't let anyone die that way. Then she remembered a snapshot of her dead sister back in the good old days. The two of them, taking turns on a tree swing in their backyard. It was a simple image, but it gave her strength, or froze her sense of humanity. Either way, she wasn't about to lift a finger to help Thawne. As the man's shrieking reached a horrendous peak, Halo reloaded the shotgun slowly, methodically. Smoke from the hut was rapidly engulfing the two combatants. Jason appeared to tear a thick ream of flesh from Thawne's torso, making bile bubble out of his mouth. "Kill me," he begged, his voice glottal and slurred. "Kill me." "Sorry," said Halo. "You're not worth the ammo. Send my regards to your wife." The man's vocal agony reached new heights as Jason lifted him into the air by his feet. Suspended upside down above a massive hole in the roof, Thawne bared his teeth at Halo, his face bright red, dripping with his own blood. A maze of intestines bulged from his belly. "You're next," he gargled. Jason released the feet and he tumbled into the abyss. Norwood Thawn was burning in hell just as he deserved. Yet Halo's limited sense of triumph was short-lived. Jason returned his attention to her, most of his jet-black body glistening with blood. The giant searched for his cleaver on the ground. In the spot where it had been, a gaping hole pulsated with heat and light. The hotel had swallowed the weapon. Jason straightened and focused on Halo again. She was already running, over to what she believed was the front of the hotel, praying that the ground held up beneath her. Maybe, just maybe, if she made herself visible on top of the roof, someone might see her and work a miracle. Steaming, bubbling heat seemed to surround her. It was like moving across the base of an awakening volcano. Jason's footsteps landed close behind her, but the roof was crumbling at his feet. He swayed on the edge as a wide portion of stone, its underlying rubber membrane, and an entire ventilation unit melted into the abyss. He stepped back, shaking with rage. Halo resumed her dash toward the roof's edge. Waylon felt the crowd surge around him. Most of them were looking upwards, walking backwards away from the building, in order to secure a better view. Zell Rayner jabbed a finger skyward for his cameraman's benefit. "There's someone on the roof!" He was keeping himself off the screen while a flunky attempted to wipe blood from his face. Waylon regretted daubing that stuff on Rayner. It would probably make that jackass think he was some kind of war correspondent. he'd probably win a damn award. The crowd held its breath as they peered up at the roof's lone figure. The cameraman trained his sights on her. "It's a chick," he muttered in Raynor's ear. "We've just been told it's a female on top of the roof," Raynor announced into the microphone, irritably shrugging off the flunky, now that most of the blood had been cleaned away. "There is a woman trapped on the roof, I repeat. Can the fire department save her?" Next to him, a fire chief overheard the question and sadly shook his head. One front section of the hotel came loose, tumbling to the ground in a shower of metal, glass, and stone, leaving fire trails in the air. It sent onlookers scattering in all directions. Halo waved her arms. A weak ripple of crowd noise floated up to reach her. She knew it was useless. What did she expect? The fire engine's ladder would reach this height? And neither could she jump off the building down into a conveniently stretched out blanket. She checked on Jason's progress. He had navigated the latest hole in the roof, and there was no longer any obstacles left between them. She considered jumping into one of the holes, a horribly inviting prospect, as it would rob Jason the pleasure of killing her. Yet once again her wounds seemed to warn her not to. Halo pressed the shotgun's butt against her shoulder and aimed at Jason's mask. He walked towards her, hands still wet with Thawns' life essence. Halo fired. As she did so, her brain panicked. She was standing with her back to the edge of the roof. The recoil might... She found herself falling backwards, frantically swinging her arms to quell her momentum, and releasing her grip on the shotgun. It was gone in an instant, striking the side of the roof and clattering out of sight. "She's about to fall!" shrieked someone in the crowd, giving rise to collective hysteria, edged with morbid excitement. "Keep the camera on her," whispered Raynor to his man. "This is TV gold." The fountain's water exploded upwards. Deputy Kenneth Riger's shotgun had landed. Halo regained her balance and darted away from the roof's edge. Jason was farther away, having been thrown back by the blast, but she couldn't even tell where she had hit him. He was covered in wounds, but none seemed to have any effect, barely even slowing him down. The night air seemed to move as smoke brought it to life. The heat was so fierce that Halo couldn't stay in the same place for long, just as well as Jason was closing in again. Backing along the roof edge, she winced as the ground behind her gave way. There was nowhere left to run. She was fenced in by burning caverns in the ground. Jason was so close she could hear him breathe. Flashing lights caught her attention. She looked over and saw a helicopter suspended in the darkness at roof level. The craft's rotor chopped through the air, the word police emblazoned across its sleek body. "Nobody move!" said a distorted, amplified voice. "Sir, we have you in our sights. Surrender immediately." "Yeah, right," Halo muttered, concentrating on not falling backwards. But she felt dizzy. "Just stand upright," she told herself. "That's all you have to do." Jason kept walking. A shot rang. Jason's chest squirted blood, which hit Halo's sneakers. Another shot carved him a new mask hole. He reacted as though swatting flies. Halo's heart sank. Was this all they were packing? They needed a fucking bazooka. She prepared to die. After the day she'd had, it almost felt like a relief. "There's clearly some kind of conflict up on the very edge of the roof," said Raynor in full live news drama mode. "A huge male is advancing on the woman while a police helicopter opens fire on him. Either they missed or he's wearing some kind of body armor. This is terrifying to watch. Nobody knows yet whether this man was responsible for the hotel fire, as the cause has yet to be established. Rest assured, WCX News is staying right here until we find out." Halo did her best to fight Jason off, as he grabbed at her head. But what really was the point? Nearby, the helicopter ducked and swerved, attempting to find an angle for another shot. "Stand away from the female!" the voice commanded. Halo blinked and she saw a gun rammed against the right side of Jason's head. It fired, sending chunks of flesh and dark blood hurtling out of the other side. Then it fired again, blowing more of Jason's brains off the side of the building. Jason released Halo and turned to see Tom, clutching the smoking gun, which Norwood had dropped. He was bare-chested and covered with soot, his shirt wrapped around his wounded left hand. Halo took a breath. but had no time to celebrate his reappearance. Having suffered these close-range blasts, Jason finally appeared unsteady on his feet. Tom fired again, taking off another piece of Jason's head. "Sir, hold your fire," ordered the helicopter. "We have the situation under control." "The hell you do!" Tom yelled, his voice hoarse as Jason turned on him. A fist drove into Tom's shoulder, sending him flying back into the fog. "Tom!" Halo cried, praying he hadn't tumbled down into one of the roof's many holes. She doubled up in excruciating pain as another punch struck her abdomen. Her mouth opened and closed, desperately seeking air. In a single wretched instant, she felt the sure knowledge that her baby had died within her. Halo's eyes narrowed and her flesh prickled over. A war cry began in her guts, traveling up through her body, swiftly gaining force and volume until it finally soared out of her mouth. "You motherfucker!" She threw herself at Jason, grabbing him by the head, ramming her fingers into his eye holes, and feeling the cold flesh yield to her fury. She hammered on the jagged bone which still pierced the top of his head, slamming it deeper into his skull. He grabbed her side, squeezing her with a crippling force. She could feel he had been weakened. She could feel his blood on her fingers. She could feel his pain, and she wanted him to feel more. Most of all, she wanted this vessel of sick, pointless hatred to die. Still clinging to his head, she exerted her weight on him, driving them both toward the edge of the roof. "You've taken your last victim!" she screamed. Blood pounded hotly in her head as she urged them both toward oblivion. Jason took another step backwards, finding only air. Then he and Halo were toppling together, falling off the roof. For a split second, Halo was riding Jason Voorhees, gazing down at the flashing lights and the people below. She felt strangely detached. Maybe it was because this was the right thing to do. The sight was strangely beautiful. Then it all changed. There was a sudden tightness around her throat. She was suspended in the air as if captured by a freeze frame, while Jason's body fell away from her, down toward the ground. Her backside landed on the side of the roof. Then she was dragged backwards across its rough surface. She felt the tightness around her throat again, which she realized was a result of the neck of her t-shirt being bunched up and pulled. "Jesus!" said Tom behind her. He sounded crazed. "I only just grabbed you. What were you doing?" Halo stared blankly at the point where the roof's edge met the night. She was cradling her belly with both hands. "Ending it." As Jason plummeted, there was stunned silence at ground level. Jaws hung low, eyes didn't dare blink, and WCX News cameraman struggled to follow the giant's descent. The more nervous spectators scampered for cover. Jason hammered onto the fountain with an almighty crunch, landing across the phoenix sculpture's wings. His body was impaled in 8 places along their spiked peaks, while the bird's majestically upturned beak pierced his guts. One wing's wicked peak had plunged through his mask and out through the back of his head. Cries of horror rang out. Some began screaming uncontrollably, as if this was one shock too many, tipping them into madness. "He's hit the fountain," said Rayner, feeling unable to do anything other than state the blindingly obvious. "The water is still flowing over him, washing away the blood. So much blood, people!" The fountain's large basin slowly began to turn black, as Jason's bodily fluids were recycled through the system. His body remained still as the water gushed over him, from ruptured head to foot. Chuck Whalen stared at him, hardly daring to blink, waiting for this big bastard to slowly, methodically drag himself from those great metallic points. He didn't. Whalen punched the air and felt around for the small coke wrap in his pocket. Time to celebrate. Halo and Tom waited as the helicopter drifted toward them. Inside, the shooter stowed away his rifle and wrenched open a side door, as the craft rested one leg on the side of the building. The roof shook beneath the pair, yet neither appeared alarmed. They had already made their peace with death, several times over, so any further life was simply a bonus. Halo gripped Tom's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "You know, someone told me this was going to happen," said Halo vacantly. "A psychic. She said that the wings of destiny would save me." She nodded down at the fountain. "Looks like she was right." Tom felt too weak to comment. His makeshift shirt bandage was dripping with blood, his skin an ethereal white. He nodded gravely and stood back, allowing Halo to clamber aboard the helicopter first. Once in the air, they watched as the entire hotel caved in on itself. 5 minutes later, there was no roof left to stand on. Bright light sized through the black. Fatigued nurses were tugging at the ward's curtains, ushering in the sun's long rays. Halo blinked. She drew one hand up from beneath the sheets, using it to shield her eyes. Every single part of her ached, despite the painkillers. Around the ward, she could dimly make out other beds. She remembered everything after leaving the hotel roof in short, sharp flashes. Watching the hotel collapse, the temperature inside the helicopter seeming to drop as it flew over Crystal Lake. Being given heavy sedation once she was stretched into the hospital. Repeatedly asking after her baby when she was woken up. Being told the cold, hard truth. It was no news to her, but desperately painful to hear, spoken by someone else. She appreciated the honesty nonetheless. She also remembered worrying that Tom was going to die, especially after realizing what had happened to one of his hands. He had passed out in the helicopter as she sobbed into his shoulder. Where was he? Her neck creaked with the effort of turning her head. She slowly focused in on Tom's face, in the adjacent bed. His upper body was visible. A drip had been attached to the back of his left hand, and an IV bag hung from a nearby metal post. His right hand was securely bandaged, and an oxygen mask obscured half his face. But he was alive. That, in itself, was a mercy. She remembered more of Denzella's prophecy. There will be a great new arrival, but you will also experience great loss. Once again, the woman had been correct, just not in the way Halo had anticipated. She would have to find her and thank her. Tom's eyes creaked open like coffin lids. Seeing her, he gamely attempted a weak smile. So, are we dead yet? Halo shrugged. Tom reached over with his mummified hand. Halo wrapped her own hand around as much of it as she could. Tom unleashed a chuckle that exploded into a raw, hacking cough. We'll have to change beds, he said. I'm a little short of fingers this side. Then Halo was crying and laughing. Emotion exploded out of her in a tidal wave as she gripped that bandaged lump. Man, what a brutal come-down. Wayland shielded his eyes against the sun and checked his watch. 7:30 a.m. He had been up for what remained of the night, bolstered by his magic powder. For the last hour, though, his sense of buoyant confidence had crumbled away bit by bit, leaving him nervous, paranoid, and more than a little shaky. Guilt bloomed quickly within him. The fire had, as far as he could gather, started in his kitchen. Worst of all, though, was what he had done to Skipper. The kid's awful wailing continued to reverberate inside his tortured brain. As if starting his lifelong penance right then and there, Wayland had finally helped load the burnt and mutilated into the backs of ambulances. Someone from the sheriff's department, who would be asking him follow-up questions later today, had interviewed him. He had finally granted an interview to a steely-eyed Zell Rayner, relating everything that had happened in a lengthy, amphetamine-fueled rant. After 10 minutes, Rayner had to forcibly stop him talking. But whatever he had been doing, Wayland had kept one firm eye on Jason Voorhees. He now knew the man's name, as various folk had been bandying it about for the last few hours. Having spent most of his life in Chicago, Wayland had only vaguely heard of the legend, and struggled to absorb everything. So what was this Voorhees? How did he withstand so much damage and still live? What was his secret? Did he do PCP? The fountain's water basin was jet black. Water continued to pour over the impaled giant. It was a bewitching sight. Mythical bird met mythical killer, head on. Wayland drew limited comfort from the fact that, no matter how bad his own come-down felt, Jason's had been infinitely more damaging. The fire engines were long gone. The blazes had died at around 5, leaving the Phoenix Heights Hotel a hollow, charred mass of twisted girders and brick. The living had all been ferried off to hospital. Body bags had been zipped up and removed, which only left Jason Voorhees. Wayland was standing by the fountain as 4 medics jumped into the basin, up to their knees in the foul water. climbing up to grab strategic areas of Jason's body. They were instantly drenched. "Need a hand?" he asked them. The medics looked at him for a moment. Then the most senior-looking shrugged. "Sure." Waylon leapt into the water and positioned himself under Jason's head. "You know, this bastard tried to kill me last night," he said. "Took down most of my team." The senior medic wasn't listening. He was yelling at someone off in the distance. "Hey, Scotty, you worked out how to turn this damn water off yet?" Waylon looked at what remained of Jason's face, at the metal spike which split through the mask's center, then out of the back of his skull. "This ought to do it," called a voice in the distance. Waylon drew back a fist and smacked the top of Jason's head. "Fuck you, man," he said. Then he spat on the mask and watched the phlegm dribble down its filthy, dented, cracked surface. The fountain's water thinned and then stopped altogether. "Okay," said the senior medic. "Push him upwards after 3. Everyone nodded. Waylon placed his hand under one of Jason's shoulders. 1, 2... The twitching of fingers on Jason's right hand went unnoticed. 3! Those fingers balled into a fist. "Do it!" My Life, Part 5, The Resurrection. I knew nothing until I woke up in hospital, full of tubes. Apparently I had been comatose for 4 days, which would account for all the dreams that had been swirling around in my head, and now left stains like fresh paint. The most memorable saw God and the devil engaging in epic combat with each other in the heavens, hurling bolts of translucent energy at each other. At one point they both had Norwood Thawn's face, God displaying the man's charmingly benign side, the devil his infinite darkness. Finally seizing each other with great fury, they fought for several minutes as the elements around them were thrown into chaos. Clouds darkened and winds raged. The sun and the moon became replaced with glowing hockey masks. Then the pair tumbled from the sky and plunged into the depths of Crystal Lake. When Jason Voorhees rose up from the burning, blood-red waters, machete in hand, with horns protruding from his misshapen head, it was very obvious which side had won. It's not so obvious, the more I start to think about it, which side I am actually on, especially after the business with Daimler. The best I can do is to follow my beliefs, just like any other fallible human being. It took a while for the memories of killing him to come flooding back. The process was surprisingly guilt-ridden, I must confess. As much as Ed Daimler irritated and offended me, bringing his life to a halt brought me no great pleasure. Then there was Norwood, repaying my kindness with the worst kind of treachery. That knife, was it Norwood or Penelope who had stabbed me, in effect, had missed my left lung by 1/4 of an inch. Thankfully, the hotel fire meant that emergency services soon found me, bleeding to death in that brain-splattered Lincoln, and carted me off in an ambulance. So why did I still love him? That's right, love. I'd never felt it before, considering the inner chambers of my heart had to be locked off zones. But there was something about this man that made me hear wedding bells. Of course, it was all academic. Norwood Thawn had been incinerated in that hotel. His body had not been recovered, strictly speaking, but neither had at least 50 of the guests and 4 members of staff. It was as if they had ceased to exist, reduced to ash. No doubt many of them were first hacked to death by that devil Jason, before the fire erased them entirely. That little bitch, Haley Harlan, nicknamed Halo, which was a joke in itself, had already related how Norwood and Voorhees had fought on the roof. I really had to fight to hide my emotions as her interview transcript was read out to me. The heinous details of his evisceration, the way in which he was dropped into the flames. How Norwood would have hated to learn that his nemesis Voorhees had somehow survived his fall from that roof, eventually reanimating as 5 people attempted to remove him from that fountain, killing 2 of them within seconds. Voorhees had reportedly wrenched himself from the metal phoenix's spikes, jumped down to the ground level, and strode away, heading toward the woods and more specifically the lake. I was sure that WCX News were kicking themselves for not hanging around any longer. What legendary, if largely unbroadcastable footage they would have captured. Still, WCX cameras had immortalized Voorhees tackling Harlan on that blazing rooftop, and those scenes had been networked for all their considerable worth. Harlan and her new boyfriend had become quite the celebrities for squaring off against this fearsome slayer and living to tell the tale. So have I, for that matter. I've become the plucky new FBI recruit who witnessed her partner having his head blown off by a puritanical serial killer and was subsequently stabbed and left for dead, after being forced to drive him to the Phoenix Heights. Certainly not the way I planned it, but the results have been satisfactory. Everything truly happens for a reason. This whole sorry affair has even produced results for a girl named Tina Shepard and her boyfriend, whose cases are apparently being reconsidered, given that Jason Voorhees actually appears to exist. Haley Harlan, she can wait. She'll get hers, just the way Norwood Thawn would have wanted. No, it's Jason Voorhees who needs to pay, and as quickly as possible. I know what you're thinking. Norwood tried to kill me, so why avenge him? Well, sometimes love knows no reason, and even if Norwood had his faults, such as attempting to end my life, his cause is something from which I shall never waver. That's why I was glad to be summoned to Washington, D.C. by the FBI's directors. As I approached the Hoover building, shielding my eyes against the sunlight that glinted off its crushed dolomite limestone, I could easily anticipate what they wanted to know. Sure enough, I was consulted about Jason Voorhees. I sat in a long meeting room flanked by the FBI's big brass. They offered their condolences for my former partner, to whom I nodded bravely. It was like being interviewed by the cops about Walter Cusp all over again, like taking candy from a baby. And I told them Ed was a damn good man. Well, what was the alternative? Ed was a pathetic alcoholic with old-fashioned attitudes and way too much testosterone? That rather assuaged my guilt. The fact that I had at least ensured that the FBI would never learn of the downward spiral their darling Daimler had been riding. Then they began asking questions about Voorhees. I hadn't actually met him, they knew that. But Norwood Thawn had. What, if anything, had I learned about Clearwater's now very real killer? The public was calling for action to be taken, and the district's mayor was desperate to rid himself of this perennial bugbear, once and for all. The tourist trade had unsurprisingly died a terrible death. Perhaps worse, people were evacuating Clearwaters, loading up and rolling out in their droves. What? Asked the FBI's director. What do you think might be the best course of action as regards to Jason Voorhees? 6 pairs of eyes drilled into me. An expectant silence consumed the room. Inside, I positively hummed with the thrill of all this power. My fingers traced the outline of the scar on my chest. I'm so glad you've asked, I said, fixing each of them in turn with a confident beam. I have a plan which will finally allow us to trap Jason Voorhees, then send him straight to hell. The end. Wow, I gotta say that Jason Arnott, the author of this book, has got to be like a super fan of this series, either that or did a lot of research. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but does it not sound like Melissa Van Statt is going to be the girl, the FBI agent in Jason Goes to Hell at the beginning, that tricks Jason and gets him blown up? Because to me it sounds like that's what they're saying at the end of her diary there. That she's going to be the one that comes up with that plan that leads into the beginning of Jason Goes to Hell. Anyways, awesome nod to part 7 throughout this whole book. The way Jason looked, Tina Shepard being mentioned at the end. I'm going to be doing these kill count things at the end of the narrations, but man, I don't have 2 hours to delve into all the deaths tonight in tonight's narration in the conclusion of this book. So instead, let's just count who survived, okay? We got Melissa Van Statt surviving, we got Tom, we got Haley. Is that it? That's all the main characters? Waylon, we're pretty sure Waylon survived. It said 2 of the 5 people that pulled Jason off the statue died. So I'm going to choose to believe that Waylon was still hopped up on cocaine so much that when Jason started twitching and killing, he just went running away at like 100 miles per hour and never looked back. Though he probably is sleeping with one eye open like he mentioned in the book. Guys, I would love to hear your comments on this book, what you think of it. Ranking this book with Hell Lake and Church of the Divine Psychopath, I would have to say this book is number 1. Church is number 2, and Hell Lake is number 10. Yes, I know there's only 3 choices, but Hell Lake is still number 10 out of the 3. But anyways, let me know what you guys think. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I can't think of much in the way of complaints about it. I feel like the whole Melissa Van Stat twist was freaking awesome. I did not see that coming. You know, I really thought that was the diary of Thawn. And, you know, luck would have it that I was reading it in his voice. Thankfully, it was him reading the diary we found out in the cop car after Daimler was killed. Because if not, I would have had egg on my face there. Like I said, let me know what you guys think. I'll put a poll up on the Facebook page so you can vote on it. That's it of this book, guys. Like I said, it was great. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be starting on A Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Spawn. Until then, guys, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Click that like button. Click the bell so you always know when new chapters are dropping. And also, I'm going to put out a bigger video about this tomorrow. But while I was doing the narration, the channel hit 1,000 subscribers. And I want to thank everybody so much. We reached this huge milestone. And as soon as the 750 subscriber giveaway is done next Friday, I will be announcing the 1,000 subscriber giveaway. And it's going to be big. So until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, not every Friday the 13th book has to be as bad as Hell Lake. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for listening. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Dream Spawn. Prologue. The girl lay wide-eyed in the dark, covers pulled up just below her eyes, waiting for the monster. She was 7, a big girl now, and she knew things that other kids in school did not seem to understand. They all thought that closing the closet door or having a nightlight could keep the monster away. They didn't know the monster like she did.
Never sleep again.